Picture this: a vast, wind-swept frontier where two nations meet. This is the border separating China from Mongolia, a landscape so barren and remote that you could travel for dozens of kilometers without encountering a single settlement. The terrain here is unforgiving, marked by endless stretches of emptiness that seem to belong to no one. Yet beneath this desolate surface lies something extraordinary. And right now, across this forgotten borderland, two neighboring countries are embarking on an infrastructure project that could fundamentally alter the energy landscape of an entire continent. The project in question is a railway. But this isn't just any railway. It's a strategic lifeline that will stretch from Ganki-Maodu on the Chinese side directly to Gashun-Sukhait in Mongolia. On paper, it might appear to be nothing more than the second cross-border rail connection between these two nations. But look deeper, and you'll discover that this project is intrinsically linked to one of the world's most valuable untapped resources: a colossal coal deposit containing nearly 6 billion tons of reserves. When this railway finally becomes operational, it promises to unlock a steady flow of Mongolian coal into China, potentially redrawing the energy security map not just for these two countries, but for all of Asia. Yet here's what most people don't realize. This ambitious cross-border railway project isn't new. In fact, the idea was first proposed over 2 decades ago, 21 years to be precise. But for reasons we'll explore, it languished in bureaucratic limbo for more than 20 years. Only this year have both governments announced they're finally moving forward. So what exactly happened during those 2 decades of delay? What obstacles kept this crucial project on hold for so long? And now that construction has finally begun, what kind of impact will this railway have on China's energy security, Mongolia's economy, and the broader geopolitical landscape of Asia? If you're interested in stories about global economics, infrastructure, and geopolitics, consider subscribing to stay updated on our latest investigations and analyses. Now, let's dive into this remarkable story. To understand why this railway matters so much, we first need to understand Mongolia itself. Sandwiched between two of the world's most powerful nations, Russia to the north and China to the south, Mongolia occupies a peculiar position on the world stage. Despite having a population of just 3.5 million people, the country sprawls across 1.56 million square kilometers of territory. That makes it one of the most sparsely populated nations on Earth. The landscape is harsh and inhospitable. Endless steppes, rocky deserts, and mountains that stretch toward distant horizons. But beneath this rugged terrain lies a geological treasure trove that few countries can match. Mongolia ranks among the world's most mineral-rich nations. According to official geological surveys, the country sits atop proven coal reserves exceeding 200 billion tons, a figure that places it comfortably within the global top 10. And these aren't just ordinary coal deposits scattered randomly across the countryside. Among Mongolia's many coal fields, one stands out as truly exceptional: the Tavan-Tolgoi deposit in the southern Gobi Desert. This single coal field contains an estimated 6 billion tons of coal reserves. But what makes Tavan-Tolgoi truly special is the quality of its coal. Nearly half of the deposit consists of premium coking coal, the type of coal that's absolutely essential for steel production. Let me explain why this matters. Coking coal isn't the kind of coal you burn for electricity or heating. It's a specialized metallurgical coal that, when heated in the absence of air, produces coke, a carbon-rich material that's irreplaceable in modern steelmaking. The coking coal at Tavan-Tolgoi possesses exceptional characteristics: low sulfur content, high heating value, and minimal impurities. These qualities make it extremely competitive in international markets. Industry experts estimate that if Tavan-Tolgoi were fully developed, it could produce more than 30 million tons of coal annually. The total economic value of this single deposit could exceed $300 billion over its lifetime. That's the potential. But there's a massive problem standing in the way. Mongolia's railway infrastructure is, to put it bluntly, inadequate for a resource-rich nation of its size. The entire country currently operates just two main railway lines, with a combined total length of barely 1,800 kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's less railway track than many individual provinces in China. Even worse, most of these existing rail lines don't reach the key mining regions where the valuable resources are actually located. Consider the situation at Tavan Tolgoi, that massive coal field we just discussed. Every year, tens of millions of tons of coal are extracted from the desert earth at this site. But getting that coal to buyers presents an enormous logistical challenge. Since there's no railway connecting the mine to the Chinese border, every single ton of coal must be loaded onto heavy trucks and driven across rough desert roads to the Gankamaudu border crossing. A grueling journey of approximately 240 kilometers. Now, 240 kilometers might not sound like an enormous distance, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. The roads are poorly maintained, the infrastructure is outdated, and the conditions are punishing. A journey that should take a few hours often stretches beyond 20 hours. Trucks crawl through dust storms, navigate deteriorating roads, and queue for hours at overwhelmed border checkpoints. The financial impact of this inefficiency is staggering. Transporting coal by truck from the mine to the border costs between $30 and $33 per ton. By contrast, if the same coal were moved by rail, the transportation cost would drop to under $10 per ton. Think about what that means. For that 250-kilometer journey alone, the transportation markup of over $30 per ton effectively erases much of the natural price advantage that Mongolian coal should enjoy. And this doesn't even account for the frequent congestion at the Mangui border crossing, where railway capacity bottlenecks reduce efficiency by an additional 15% compared to truck transport. Under these circumstances, Mongolia's coal industry has been unable to reach its true potential. The resources are there, the demand exists, but the missing link, literally, is the infrastructure to connect the two. Faced with these transportation constraints, Mongolia explored other options. One possibility was to pivot northward and increase coal exports to Russia. After all, Russia shares a lengthy border with Mongolia, and the two countries have historical ties dating back to the Soviet era. But this strategy ran into an immediate problem. Russia doesn't need Mongolian coal. Russia possesses massive coal reserves of its own. The Kuznetsk Basin alone, one of Russia's major coal-producing regions, contains proven reserves exceeding 200 billion tons. Why would Russia import coal when it's sitting on such vast domestic supplies? Furthermore, Mongolia's relationship with Russia is complicated by historical dependencies. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Mongolia inherited a railway system built to Russian specifications, including the use of Russian broad-gauge tracks measuring 1,520 millimeters in width. This legacy infrastructure has left Mongolia in a vulnerable position, unable to exercise full autonomy over its own transportation development strategy. But to Mongolia's south lies a completely different story. China, the world's largest coal consumer by an enormous margin. According to recent statistics, Mongolia produced approximately 97.72 million tons of coal in 2024. Of that total, an astonishing 83.8 million tons, more than 85%, was exported to China. There's simply no comparison. China is far and away the dominant customer for Mongolian coal. Yet even this massive trade relationship faces serious constraints. Mongolia currently relies almost entirely on a single aging railway line to handle these exports. This cross-border passage runs from Zamen-Ud on the Mongolian side to Ehrenhot in China, and it was constructed way back in the mid-20th century. When it was built, this railway was perfectly adequate for the trade volumes of that era. But today, it's hopelessly overwhelmed. The annual transportation capacity of this line maxes out at around 50 million tons, far below current export demands. Every aspect of the operation has become a choke point. Train assembly, loading and unloading efficiency, the need to transfer cargo between different gauge systems. Each of these processes creates delays. At major coal-producing sites like Tolgoi, thousands of tons of coal sit in massive piles, waiting for train capacity that never seems to come. As long as the trains can't return quickly enough, the coal can't be shipped, and the backlog grows day after day. This transportation bottleneck has become the single greatest obstacle preventing Mongolia's coal industry from expanding. Against this backdrop of mounting frustration, Mongolia repeatedly urged China to accelerate plans for a second cross-border railway connection. Finally, this February, a breakthrough occurred. The Chinese and Mongolian governments formally signed a new cross-border railway cooperation agreement in Harbin, China. The project, connecting Gashun-Sukhait to Gankimaodu, was officially green-lit. This represents a genuinely historic moment. It will be the first new cross-border railway between these two nations since the Ehrenhot-Zaman-Yud line opened nearly 70 years ago in 1956. The financial commitment is substantial. The total investment for the project is estimated at approximately $2.6 billion. Construction officially commenced in May 2025, with completion targeted for June 2027. The investment breakdown reflects the priorities and capacities of each partner. Mongolia has committed to covering roughly 60% of the initial construction costs, primarily handling line construction and land preparation within its own territory. China, meanwhile, is investing approximately 40%, focusing on upgrading border port facilities, constructing railway interface connections, and providing comprehensive operating systems and technical support. But almost immediately, the project encountered a significant technical challenge, one that goes to the heart of the historical railway divide between these two countries. As I mentioned earlier, Mongolia's existing railway network uses Russian broad-gauge tracks, measuring 1,520 millimeters in width. Chinese railways, on the other hand, use the international standard gauge of 1,435 millimeters. These two systems are incompatible. Trains designed for one gauge simply cannot run on tracks built to the other specification. Solving this problem required extensive negotiations between Chinese and Mongolian engineers and officials. The solution they eventually agreed upon represents a compromise, a dual-track parallel design incorporating both gauge systems. Here's how it works. Separate main lines will be constructed in each cross-border section, each corresponding to the domestic track gauge of the respective country. The actual border crossing section will feature a bridge measuring 6.08 kilometers in length. On the Mongolian side of this bridge, tracks will be laid in broad gauge. On the Chinese side, standard gauge. This allows trains from each country to operate seamlessly within their own systems, while maintaining the ability to transfer cargo at the border interface. Now, you might be thinking, this is just a 10-kilometer railway connection. How significant can it really be? The answer lies not in the physical length of the tracks, but in what those tracks will connect. This Gashun-Sukhait cross-border railway directly links the resource heartland of Mongolia's South Gobi province with Gankimaodu port in China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Industry observers have started calling it the Golden Corridor, and with good reason. The railway's starting point is effectively the Tolgoi coalfield and its surrounding mining areas, the most valuable and promising mineral zone in all of Mongolia. This is ground zero for what some analysts call the Black Gold Corridor, a designation that reflects the concentrated future of Mongolia's entire coal industry. For Mongolia, the completion of this railway represents nothing less than a transformation. Conservative estimates suggest that once the line becomes operational, Mongolia's annual coal export capacity could increase by 30 million tons. That translates to an additional $1.5 billion in export revenue from this single infrastructure project. But the benefits extend far beyond raw numbers. The railway is expected to reduce overall transportation costs by more than 40%. Journey times will be slashed dramatically. What currently takes 3 to 4 days will be compressed into a 48-hour cycle from mine to customer. Yet there's an even larger strategic dimension to this project, one that extends beyond coal. Remember when I mentioned at the beginning that this railway is connected to a 6 billion ton resource? While Tavan Tolgoi is certainly the centerpiece, it's not the only treasure in Mongolia's South Gobi region. Near the coal deposits lies the Oyu Tolgoi copper-gold mine, widely regarded as one of the most promising mineral projects discovered in the 21st century. Geological surveys have confirmed the presence of approximately 31 million tons of copper and 1,600 tons of gold within this deposit. At full operational capacity, Oyu Tolgoi is expected to produce around 500,000 tons of refined copper metal annually. Once this new cross-border railway becomes operational, these resources will gain access to efficient, cost-effective transportation to Chinese markets. The railway's annual capacity of more than 30 million tons means it can handle not only coal, but also copper concentrate, gold, and other minerals. From China's perspective, this is strategically invaluable. It effectively reduces Chinese dependence on resource imports from more distant and potentially unstable regions like the Middle East and Australia. Geography matters in resource security, and having a reliable overland supply route from a neighboring country is far preferable to relying on lengthy maritime shipping lanes that could be disrupted during geopolitical tensions. The economics are compelling as well. Compared to sea transportation routes, this railway can shorten delivery cycles by approximately 70% while saving between $20 and $25 per ton in transportation costs. The impact of this railway extends in multiple directions, creating ripple effects throughout the regional economy. For Ganqimao Port, which serves as a crucial border trade node in northwestern China, the railway represents a massive upgrade in capacity. For years, this port has struggled with limited freight handling capability. Once the new railway is operational, the annual customs clearance capacity will surge from 15 million tons to more than 40 million tons. The total annual import-export value processed through the port is projected to exceed $8 billion, nearly double its current throughput. The railway will also catalyze the development of supporting industries along its route. We're talking about mineral processing facilities, warehousing and logistics centers, and infrastructure support services. These secondary economic activities will create jobs and generate economic growth in regions that have historically been underdeveloped precisely because they lacked transportation infrastructure. For Mongolia, the transformation is even more profound. Currently, nearly 90% of the country's mineral exports depend on truck transportation. At sites like Tavan Tolgoi, thousands of trucks are dispatched daily in a continuous, inefficient procession across the desert. The new railway is designed to handle over 30 million tons annually. Compared to traditional road transport, this will cut transportation costs by approximately 60%, saving between $14 and $20 per ton of coal. During the construction phase alone, the project is expected to create more than 800 jobs. Once operational, it will provide over 200 permanent positions in operations and maintenance. But here's where the story takes an interesting geopolitical turn. Despite Mongolia's extensive cooperation with both China and Russia, the country has in recent years pursued what it calls the third neighbor policy, an attempt to diversify its international relationships beyond its two giant neighbors. In 2019, the United States made a high-profile diplomatic visit to Mongolia and explicitly expressed interest in launching strategic cooperation in the rare earth minerals sector. Rare earths, a group of 17 elements essential for modern electronics, renewable energy, and defense applications, have become increasingly important in great power competition. Following that initial visit, the United States dispatched numerous rare earth industry experts to Mongolia for further consultations. The stated objective was to help Mongolia establish domestic rare earth mining and processing capabilities through American corporate investment. But the collaboration hasn't progressed as smoothly as American officials might have hoped. The fundamental problem is this. While Mongolia does possess significant rare earth deposits, it lacks the independent refining technology and environmental management systems necessary to process these materials. And Mongolia cannot easily bypass China's mature and highly integrated rare earth processing infrastructure. Moreover, despite expressing verbal enthusiasm, the United States has yet to present truly attractive terms for cooperation. Promises and diplomatic visits are one thing. Concrete investment commitments and technology transfers are another. In 2023, Mongolia formally signed an Open Skies Agreement with the United States and once again signaled its intention to expand rare earth cooperation. Yet a fundamental practical obstacle remains unresolved: the export route. Here's Mongolia's essential dilemma, one that can't be solved through diplomacy or wishful thinking alone. Mongolia is a landlocked country. If you think about it, look at any map and the situation becomes immediately clear. There is no coastline, no access to ports, no direct connection to maritime trade routes. To the north lies Russia, to the south lies China. The entire national border is encircled by these two major powers. This geographical reality has profound implications. Whether Mongolia is exporting coal, copper, gold, or rare earth elements, there are only two possible routes: through China to the south or through Russia to the north. There is, honestly, no third option that doesn't involve traversing the territory of one of these neighbors. Without the cooperation, or at minimum, the passive consent, of China or Russia, Mongolia's so-called international trade diversification largely remains an aspiration rather than a reality. This is why the railway we've been discussing is so much more than just a transportation project. It represents Mongolia's economic lifeline, the physical infrastructure that connects Mongolian resources to the global economy. And it's why, despite exploring alternatives, Mongolia ultimately had no choice but to deepen its economic integration with China. Which brings us back to the question we posed at the beginning. If this railway project is so obviously beneficial to both countries, why did it take 21 years from initial proposal to actual construction? The answer involves a complex mixture of technical challenges, financial constraints, geopolitical sensitivities, and competing priorities. First, there were the genuine technical obstacles we've discussed. The incompatible rail gauge systems, the need to negotiate complex engineering solutions, the challenges of building infrastructure across harsh desert terrain with extreme temperature variations. Second, there were financial considerations. A $2.6 billion infrastructure project requires not just money, but political will, long-term planning, and confidence in future economic returns. Both countries needed to reach a point where they were willing to commit these resources. Third, and perhaps most significantly, there were geopolitical dimensions. Mongolia has long been cautious about becoming too economically dependent on China. The third neighbor policy we discussed reflects this concern, a desire to maintain strategic autonomy even while recognizing economic reality. For China, the timing also had to be right. China needed to reach a point where securing additional resource supply routes from neighboring countries became a strategic priority worth significant infrastructure investment. It's only in recent years, as global supply chains have become more fragile, as geopolitical tensions have increased, and as both countries have recognized the mutual benefits more clearly, that the political alignment finally emerged to turn this decades-old proposal into concrete action. So what does the future look like once this railway becomes operational in 2027? For China, it means enhanced energy security at a time when energy security has become a paramount concern for major economies worldwide. A reliable overland supply route for coal and other minerals from a neighboring country reduces vulnerability to maritime disruptions and geopolitical shocks. For Mongolia, it means the potential to finally realize the economic promise that its vast mineral wealth has always represented but never quite delivered. With efficient, low-cost transportation infrastructure in place, Mongolia can attract more foreign investment in mining, expand production, and potentially develop value-added processing capabilities domestically, rather than simply exporting raw materials. For the broader region, this railway could serve as a template for future infrastructure cooperation. If successful, it might encourage additional cross-border projects that further integrate the Central Asian and East Asian economic spaces. But challenges will remain. Mongolia will need to manage its relationship with both China and Russia carefully, balancing economic necessity against the desire for strategic independence. Environmental concerns about expanded coal and mineral extraction will need to be addressed, and the global energy transition toward renewable sources means that coal, even high-quality coking coal, faces an uncertain long-term future. There's a certain irony in this story. In an age when we're constantly told about the digital economy, about services and innovation and intangible assets, here we have a massive infrastructure project fundamentally about moving rocks, coal, copper, minerals, from one place to another using 19th century technology.